COVID-19 lawsuits against the government continue to pile up as various sectors question the state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and whether or not enough was done to protect jobs in the country. Labour consultant Tony Healy at Tony Healy and Associates joins us now. Tony, good evening and thank you for your time tonight. We are seeing court challenges from particularly the cigarette sector, from the alcohol sector, because jobs there have been lost and they feel not enough was done to protect those jobs. The Democratic Alliance at some point also taking government to court on the lockdown regulations, saying they were unconstitutional because they created a second pandemic, and that of poverty, and subjecting people to no work and no income. Did government do enough to ensure that those jobs were protected?
Well, good evening. I think firstly one must recognize that to be in a position of leadership at a time like this is extremely difficult, and it's easy to shoot arrows at our leaders. Who would want their job at the moment, to be honest? Having said that, I think in all fairness, government has done a lot of good insofar as being able to help sustain the livelihoods of many South Africans in various ways with the distress grant and the UIF TERS benefit. That said, there are certain things that government has or hasn't done which has been unhelpful. For example, I think the administration of the UIF TERS benefit has not been great. Foreign nationals have been particularly hard hit and put at the back of the queue in that regard. And one could look at other areas, for example, hospitality, where on the one hand we see that it's quite okay to fill a taxi, but it's not okay to have 4 or 5 or 6 tourists sit on the back of a game lodge vehicle in the open air. So certain things have certainly not made sense. And if you look at other industries, if you look at essential service businesses, they will tell you that government has done pretty well. If you look at the liquor industry and the cigarette manufacturing industry, they would say that government has done poorly. So depending on your point of view, some would say that government's done well, others would say they've done not so well, but to be honest, who would want their job at a time like this?
How did other countries approach this, particularly this question of hospitality? Although we did say we are adopting a smart lockdown strategy where we're going to go through various alert levels depending on how the infection rate is progressing, we really just used a one-size-fits-all for all provinces, all industries. It was just a lockdown. There was no sense of what you're saying where each industry was looked at specifically and say, let's look at the taxi industry. What are the needs here? How could we apply a lockdown? Maybe they can stay on lockdown level 3. Look at restaurants. While the whole nation is on level 5, how do we bring them maybe to a lockdown level 4? There was never an attempt like that, because I suppose it would also end up messy as far as enforcement is concerned.
Well, I think you make a good point. To look at hospitality industry as a whole and to treat them exactly the same, regardless of size and complexity, has perhaps not been wise. We have a very broad hospitality industry client base. And you can't really, if we look at the upper end of our 5-star hotel clients versus restaurants, it's very difficult to categorize them in the same way. I mean, there are ways, for example, in certain restaurant environments for there to be open air dining, which is not the case in certain other establishments. But to answer your question, the way that our government has responded to the hospitality industry is pretty much the same, it has been in the same vein as how the hospitality industry has been treated and dealt with elsewhere. And you're seeing in, for example, the countries that peaked earlier, for example, China, you'll find there that if you look at the statistics on room occupancy, for example, and food and beverage activity, you will see there that's bounced back pretty quickly. And maybe that's a ray of hope for us, because in as much as we've lost a massive number of jobs, and especially in an industry like hospitality, the chances are it will bounce back. But it will take time. We're not going to see, for example, there are hotels that have 70-80% of their revenue generated by international travelers, and we're not likely to see flights into the country anytime soon.
The UIF warning that the worst is yet to come. Now, after some analysis, what we are seeing is that less people actually applied for the ordinary unemployment benefit application. Requests were actually increased for the time benefit, which have quadrupled. What does that tell us on analysis?
Well, look, I think one of the challenges with the UIF TERS is that, and this has been perhaps a criticism that can be directed at government, is we're seeing, for example, the national state of disaster being extended. Now, it's currently been extended again, but there's no reference to whether the UIF TERS process is going to be extended at the same time. So if there is a criticism that can, I think, legitimately be laid at the doorstep of government, it is that when it comes to, for example, the UIF TERS benefit, which is so important to so many, the administration of that benefit has not been good, and there have been enormous delays and errors in that process. Some have been fortunate and not been caught up in that, but many have, and that has created enormous hardship for many employees.
And the employers themselves, are we likely to see some challenges there as far as legal challenges are concerned for those employers who did not release the UIF funds to their employees?
Look, I have no statistics on that, but I'll be very surprised if there aren't employers who have not played fair when it comes to TERS. In other words, there will no doubt be employers that have claimed the TERS benefit, received the TERS benefit, and not necessarily paid it over or completely paid it over to staff. That said, there is some confusion around that. I know of instances amongst our client base where the employer has claimed a certain benefit and they have been overpaid, or there's not been clarity in the amount that has been reflected for a particular employee in terms of what period that it covers. It's an enormous task for the UIF Commission. Again, in all fairness, these are unprecedented times, and we're kind of making this up as we go. But there is no doubt that the administration process of the UIF TERS benefit has not been as good as it should have been, and we're talking at vast amounts of money here.
Tony, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. That is labor law consultant there, Tony Healy.